November 28, 1968. 7 kilometers inside Cambodia, 20 kilometers from the South Vietnam border. Senior Captain Nguyen Thanh Lim of the People's Army of Vietnam stood at the edge of his division's base camp, watching smoke rise from cooking fires scattered across 2 square kilometers of jungle. Behind him, 30,000 soldiers from 3 North Vietnamese army divisions, the 1st, 3rd and 7th, were resting, resupplying, and preparing for the next offensive against Saigon. But before we start, subscribe to the Vietnam Tales YouTube channel for more war stories. Now let's begin. Captain Lim smiled as he surveyed the sprawling encampment. They had disappeared from American surveillance 3 weeks earlier, melting into the Cambodian jungle, where US forces officially didn't operate. The Americans knew they were out here somewhere. Liam had read the intelligence reports. MACV was frantic, scrambling reconnaissance aircraft, interrogating prisoners, desperately trying to locate 3 missing divisions. "Let them look," Liam said to his political officer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who stood beside him consulting a map. "This is Cambodia. The Americans respect these borders. They won't come here." The political officer nodded, then paused, cocking his head. "Do you hear that?" A distant sound. Rhythmic, mechanical, helicopter rotors. Liam shrugged. "Reconnaissance flight. They've been flying the border for weeks. As long as we stay under the canopy, they see nothing." What Captain Lim didn't know, what his Soviet advisors hadn't told him, what even MACV headquarters in Saigon barely understood, was that there were American soldiers who didn't respect borders, who wore no insignia, carried no identification, and operated under a secrecy agreement that would bind them to silence for 20 years. These men belonged to Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. They called themselves SOG. The enemy called them ghosts, and 6 of these ghosts were, at that precise moment, descending through the jungle canopy in a UH-1P Huey painted in unmarked camouflage, heading directly toward Captain Lim's supposedly safe Cambodian sanctuary. The numbers tell a story of mathematical impossibility. 30,000 North Vietnamese army soldiers, representing 3 full divisions with organic artillery, anti-aircraft weapons and support elements, occupying a fortified base complex covering 8 square kilometers of Cambodian jungle. Against them, 6 men. 2 American Green Berets and 4 Vietnamese mercenaries. No artillery support, no conventional air support, operating in a country where, officially, no American troops were supposed to be. The odds, 5,000 to 1. The mission parameters: locate the missing divisions, photograph the encampment, radio coordinates back to headquarters, and extract before being detected. The survival probability, calculated by intelligence analysts at MECV, less than 40%. But statistics don't explain why Captain Lim's 3 divisions would, within 4 hours, be running for their lives. Why 30,000 soldiers would abandon their encampment and scatter into the jungle in complete panic. Why North Vietnamese officers would later report being attacked by an American battalion, supported by fighter bombers, when in reality they had faced 6 men and 2 helicopters. This is the story of Spike Team Idaho's Thanksgiving Day mission. How 6 commandos stumbled into the largest enemy concentration of the war, how they fought their way out against impossible odds, and how the North Vietnamese army learned that in the secret war the old rules didn't apply. Before we continue, drop a quick comment below if you've heard of MACV SOG. Most people know about the Navy SEALs, the Green Berets, the Rangers, but the most classified unit of the Vietnam War, the men who conducted operations that would remain secret for 2 decades, are barely remembered. Let's change that. The Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, despite its bureaucratic name, was the most dangerous special operations unit in American military history. Created in January 1964, SOG conducted covert missions throughout Southeast Asia, cross-border reconnaissance into Laos and Cambodia, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail funneled men and supplies south, prisoner snatches deep in North Vietnamese territory, bomb damage assessment after B-52 strikes, rescue of downed pilots, direct action raids on enemy headquarters. The casualty rates told the story. Over 8 years of operations, MACV SOG suffered a casualty rate exceeding 100%. Every man who served with SOG was either killed, wounded, or both. They operated in small teams, typically 6 to 9 men, deep in enemy territory where they were outnumbered by hundreds or thousands to 1. They carried sterile equipment, weapons without serial numbers, uniforms without insignia. If captured, they could expect torture and execution. The Geneva Convention didn't apply to men who officially didn't exist. John Stryker Meyer had joined ESOG in May 1968, arriving at Forward Operating Base 1 in Phu Bai after graduating from the Special Forces qualification course. He was 22 years old, a college dropout from New Jersey who had enlisted in the army in December 1966 and discovered he was good at killing people in the jungle. His teammates had nicknamed him Tilt, after his habit of shaking pinball machines in New Jersey pool halls. The name stuck, and it was painted on his helmet. By November 1968, Meyer had been running missions with Spike Team Idaho for 6 months. He had survived 23 insertions into Laos, 5 into Cambodia, and 3 into North Vietnam. He had been in more firefights than he could count, had called in more airstrikes than most forward air controllers, and had learned to trust his indigenous teammates with his life. The team's Vietnamese members were legends in their own right. Nguyen Van Sao, the team leader, had been fighting the communists since 1965. 3 years of continuous combat operations across the fence. He could smell North Vietnamese soldiers from 300 meters downwind, could read tracks in the jungle like Americans read street signs, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense enemy ambushes before they were sprung. American advisors who worked with Sao described him as the most combat-effective soldier they had ever known, regardless of nationality. Nguyen Kong Heap served as interpreter and assistant team leader. Phuoc Tuan rounded out the Vietnamese contingent, both veterans with over 2 years of SOG operations. The other American, Sergeant John Bubba Shaw, was Meyer's assistant team leader, a quiet professional who had extended his tour twice to stay with the team. These 6 men had developed the kind of rapport that only comes from shared combat. They knew each other's movements, could communicate with hand signals in complete darkness, and trusted each other absolutely. They needed that trust. Because on November 28, 1968, Thanksgiving Day, they were about to face the most terrifying mission of their lives. The day began normally, if anything about SOG operations could be called normal. At 0600 hours, the team was at Bù Đốc Special Forces Camp, a fortified outpost near the Cambodian border. The mess hall had prepared a Thanksgiving feast. Turkey, gravy, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, the works. Meyer and his team ate heartily, knowing it might be their last hot meal for days. At 0900 hours, they received the mission briefing. Intelligence had lost track of 3 NVA divisions, approximately 30,000 troops, somewhere on the Cambodian side of the border. These weren't local guerrillas. These were mainline North Vietnamese army regulars, equipped with Soviet weapons, supported by artillery and anti-aircraft units. They had disappeared from American surveillance after the Tet Offensive in January, and MACV was desperate to find them. The concern was another attack on Saigon. The Tet Offensive had nearly succeeded in capturing the capital. If 3 divisions launched a coordinated assault from Cambodia, where American forces couldn't pursue them, the results could be catastrophic. ST Idaho's mission was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Insert into Cambodia, locate the missing divisions, photograph the encampment, radio coordinates, and extract. The team would carry no food, minimal water, maximum ammunition. Expected time on ground, 4 to 6 hours. Expected enemy contact. Hopefully none. The briefing officer, a major from MACV Intelligence, was blunt about the risks. Gentlemen, you're going into an area where we estimate over 100,000 NVA troops are operating. If you're compromised, extraction will be difficult. Cambodia has different rules of engagement. No white phosphorus, no fixed-wing air support, limited artillery due to international airspace restrictions. You'll have helicopter support from the Green Hornets, but that's it. The Green Hornets were the 20th Special Operations Squadron, Air Force pilots who flew specially modified UH-1P Huey helicopters. Unlike Army Hueys, the Air Force birds carried heavy weapons, M134 miniguns capable of 6,000 rounds per minute, M60 machine guns, rocket pods with 24 2.75-inch rockets. More importantly, the Green Hornet pilots were crazy enough to fly danger-close support missions that would terrify regular Army aviators. Meyer looked at his team. Tsao was expressionless, which was normal. Heap was cleaning his Kar-15 rifle, also normal. Bubba was studying the map, memorizing terrain features. Everyone had done this before. Everyone knew the risks. "When do we leave?" Meyer asked. 1300 hours, eat well, it's Thanksgiving. At 1300 hours, ST Idaho lifted off from Budop in a Green Hornet Huey, piloted by Captain Frank Jacks and First Lieutenant Art Cormier. The flight into Cambodia took 30 minutes, the helicopter flying low over the jungle canopy to avoid detection. The landing zone was a small clearing 7 kilometers inside Cambodia, far enough from the border that no one could claim the team had accidentally crossed. The helicopter flared and touched down at 1345 hours. The 6 men rolled out, weapons ready, immediately taking cover in the tree line. The Huey was gone in seconds, leaving them in the sudden silence that always followed insertion. Meyer could hear his heart pounding. 6 men dropped into enemy territory, surrounded by thousands of hostile troops, completely alone. Sao moved to point position automatically. He was always point. In 18 months of operations, he had never walked into an ambush, never missed a sign, never led the team wrong. He started moving northwest, toward where intelligence estimated the NVA encampment might be. The jungle was typical Cambodian border terrain, triple canopy, thick undergrowth, vines hanging from trees. The team moved in tactical formation, 5 meters between each man. Meyer was second in line behind Sao, Heap behind him, then Phuoc, Tuan and Bubba pulling rear security. They communicated with hand signals, no talking, no noise. After 20 minutes of movement, covering maybe 600 meters, Sao held up a closed fist. Everyone froze. Meyer moved up beside him and Sao pointed ahead. Smoke. Not jungle fire smoke. Cooking fire smoke. A lot of it. They moved forward cautiously. The jungle opened up slightly and Meyer felt his stomach drop. They were on the edge of a massive base camp. Not a company position, not a battalion position. This was division level. Bunkers stretched in every direction. Trails crisscrossed the area. Cooking fires burned every 30 meters. Equipment was stacked everywhere. Ammunition crates, food supplies, weapons, radio equipment. But here was the strange part. The camp was empty. No soldiers visible, no sentries, no movement except smoke rising from unattended fires. Meyer made the decision to enter. They needed photographs, documents, anything that would confirm which units were here. The team moved into the camp perimeter, weapons ready, senses screaming that this was wrong. They were inside a major enemy base camp and no one was challenging them. They moved to a command bunker larger than the others, with maps visible through the entrance. Meyer pulled out his camera, a specialized Minox C designed for intelligence photography, and started snapping pictures. Maps, documents, supply crates with unit markings. Bubba was photographing a weapons cache. Heap was sketching unit insignias in his notebook. Sao stood security, scanning the jungle, his Car 15 at the ready. Something was bothering him. Meyer could see it in his posture, the way he kept turning his head, sniffing the air. They had been in the camp for maybe 10 minutes when Sao suddenly stiffened. He turned to Meyer, his eyes wider than Meyer had ever seen them. Sao, who never showed fear, who had walked point through 100 firefights without flinching, was terrified. "Boku VC," Sao hissed. "Boku VC." Meyer didn't see anything, but he had learned to trust Sao absolutely. "Extract, move to the LZ now." The team started moving, weapons ready. They hadn't gone 50 meters when Meyer heard it. Voices, hundreds of voices, Vietnamese shouting, orders being barked. He turned and saw them. North Vietnamese army soldiers, wearing pith helmets and carrying AK-47 rifles, pouring into the camp from the south. Not a squad, not a platoon, hundreds of them. Meyer turned north, hoping for an escape route, and saw more soldiers coming from that direction. They were caught in the middle of 2 forces, both moving at a run, both heading directly toward them. "Contact! Contact! All sides!" Meyer screamed into his radio, breaking radio discipline because there was no point in staying silent anymore. The jungle exploded. AK-47s opened fire from both directions, hundreds of weapons creating a wall of sound. Bullets snapped past Meyer's head, impacted trees beside him, kicked up dirt at his feet. The NVA weren't aiming yet, just firing wildly, but there were so many of them that it didn't matter. The volume of fire was overwhelming. ST Idaho returned fire, 6 Car 15s on full automatic, 30-round magazines emptying in seconds. Meyer saw North Vietnamese soldiers falling, but more kept coming. Always more. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had found the missing divisions, all of them, and the divisions had found them. "Move! Move! Move!" Meyer screamed, and the team started leapfrogging back toward the extraction LZ. Bubba and Meyer would fire while the others moved, then they would run while the Vietnamese provided cover fire. It was textbook break contact procedure, but this wasn't a textbook situation. The enemy kept coming, wave after wave, and they were getting closer. Sao dropped a claymore mine, a curved plastic box packed with C4 explosive and 700 steel balls. He pulled the fuse, a 5-second delay, and ran. The explosion was massive, shredding everything in a 60-degree arc. The firing from the south slackened momentarily as survivors took cover, but the north... Oh God, the north! More soldiers were coming from the north, cutting off their escape route. They were surrounded. Meyer pulled out his sawed-off M79 grenade launcher, a weapon that looked like an oversized sawed-off shotgun. He fired a 40mm high explosive round into the mass of soldiers to the north, reloaded, fired again. Bubba was beside him doing the same, both of them pumping grenades as fast as they could load. The explosions created temporary gaps in the enemy advance, but it was like trying to stop an ocean with sandbags. "Covey, Covey, this is Idaho!" Meyer screamed into his radio handset, calling the forward air controller orbiting somewhere above them. "We are in deep shit! We need extraction now! We need fire support now!" The radio crackled. "Idaho, Covey, understand heavy contact, Green Hornets are inbound, ETA 5 minutes. Can you make it to the primary LZ?" 5 minutes. They had to survive 5 more minutes. Meyer looked around. His team was still intact, all 6 men fighting, but they were burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. Each man had started with 300 rounds. At their current rate of fire, they'd be empty in 10 minutes. "Set claymores on 5-second fuses and run," Meyer ordered. "We're not holding anything back." The team started dropping claymores along their withdrawal route, pulling 5-second fuses and running like hell. The North Vietnamese, pursuing aggressively, walked right into them. Each explosion bought them 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Each explosion also revealed their exact position, bringing more enemy troops running. Furs took a hit in the shoulder, an AK round that spun him around but didn't drop him. Heap grabbed him, kept him moving. Tuan was firing his Kar-15 one-handed, while throwing M26 fragmentation grenades with the other hand. Bubba's M79 was smoking hot, the barrel glowing from continuous fire. They reached the LZ, a small clearing barely large enough for a helicopter, and formed a hasty perimeter. The North Vietnamese were right behind them, so close that Meyer could see individual faces, could see their expressions of fury and determination. These weren't frightened conscripts. These were veteran soldiers who knew they had caught a SOG team and intended to finish it. Meyer pulled his final white phosphorus grenade, a weapon technically banned under Cambodia's rules of engagement, but screw the rules, they were about to die. He pulled the pin and threw it directly into the mass of pursuing soldiers. White phosphorus, burning at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, sprayed in every direction. Men screamed, a sound that would haunt Meyer for the rest of his life, and the advance faltered. Then he heard it. The most beautiful sound in the world. Helicopter rotors, not one helicopter, 2. The Green Hornets were coming. The UH-1P Hueys came in so low that Meyer could see the pilots' faces. Captain Jacks and Lieutenant Cormier in the lead bird, another crew in the trail helicopter. They didn't circle, didn't assess the situation, didn't hesitate. They just attacked. The M134 miniguns opened fire, a sound like God's own chainsaw, 6,000 rounds per minute tearing through the jungle. The tracer rounds, every 5th bullet made it look like solid red streams of light connecting the helicopters to the ground. Where those streams touched, men died. Not wounded, not injured, dead. The minigun's 7.62-meter rounds, travelling at 2,800 feet per second, didn't just wound. They disintegrated human bodies. The rockets came next, 24 2.75-inch high-explosive rockets from each helicopter, launched in pairs, streaking into the tree line where North Vietnamese soldiers were massing. The explosions walked across the jungle like giant footsteps, each one creating a zone of death 20 meters across. Trees shattered, bodies flew through the air, the organized NVA advance dissolved into chaos. "Idaho, Covey, lead bird is coming in for extraction. You have 30 seconds. Mark your position." Meyer pulled a smoke grenade, yellow smoke, the prearranged color for extraction. The helicopter flared over the LZ, the door gunners firing their M60 machine guns continuously, brass casings raining down like metallic hail. "Go! Go! Go!" Meyer screamed, and his team ran for the helicopter. Sal first, then Heap half carrying the wounded Phuoc, then Tuan, then Bubba. Meyer was last, firing his Kar-15 at full automatic, holding down the trigger, sweeping the tree line. The Kar-15's bolt locked back on an empty magazine. He had fired every round he carried. He turned and ran for the helicopter, expecting at any second to feel the impact of bullets in his back. 10 meters. 5 meters. Hands grabbed him, pulled him aboard. The helicopter lifted and Meyer looked down. The LC was swarming with North Vietnamese soldiers, hundreds of them, all firing upward. The door gunners returned fire, the M60s hammering, empty brass and links piling up on the helicopter floor. The trail helicopter was still circling, miniguns firing, providing cover. Then they were above the trees, climbing, the jungle falling away beneath them. Meyer collapsed on the floor, breathing hard, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He looked around. 6 men had gone in. 6 men were coming out. Phuoc had a through-and-through shoulder wound. Painful, but not life-threatening. Everyone else was intact. Captain Jacks looked back from the pilot's seat, his face visible through the cockpit doorway. He gave Meyer a thumbs up. Meyer returned it, then started laughing, the hysterical laughter that comes after you've survived something that should have killed you. They had done it. They had found the missing divisions. They had walked into the middle of 30,000 enemy soldiers, and they had fought their way out. The flight back to Bù Đốc took 30 minutes. The helicopters flew at maximum speed, burning fuel recklessly, getting away from Cambodia as fast as possible. The door gunners reloaded their machine guns and kept watch for enemy fire, but none came. The North Vietnamese didn't have anti-aircraft weapons waiting to reach them at altitude. Word had spread through the radio network. A SOG team had stumbled into the largest enemy concentration of the war and survived. It seemed impossible. The base commander, a lieutenant colonel, was waiting as they climbed out of the helicopter. "Did you find them?" he asked Meyer. Meyer, still shaking, pulled the Minox camera from his pocket and handed it over. "We found them, sir. All 3 divisions. Maybe more. They're 7 clicks inside Cambodia. Big base camp. At least 2 square kilometers. We have photos, unit markings, everything." The lieutenant colonel looked at the 6 men, covered in mud and cordite residue, magazines empty, equipment shot through with bullet holes, and shook his head in amazement. "How many were there?" Meyer considered. "All of them, sir. All of them." The photographs Meyer had taken were developed immediately and rushed to MACV headquarters in Saigon. Intelligence analysts pored over the images, identifying unit insignias, equipment types, supply configurations. The assessment was stunning. The missing 1st, 3rd, and 7th NVA divisions had been located, along with supporting artillery units, anti-aircraft batteries, and logistical elements. Total estimated strength: 32,000 troops. Within 24 hours, B-52 bombers from Guam were unleashing arc-light strikes on the coordinates ST Idaho had provided. Each B-52 carried 108 500-pound bombs. A single arc-light strike with 3 B-52s flying in formation delivered 324 bombs across a rectangular area called a bomb box, approximately 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers. The destruction was unimaginable. The North Vietnamese divisions scattered, abandoning their sanctuary, fleeing deeper into Cambodia. The planned offensive against Saigon was cancelled. American intelligence estimated that the arc-light strikes killed over 1,500 NVA soldiers and wounded thousands more. But beyond the body count was the psychological impact. The North Vietnamese had believed their Cambodian sanctuary was safe. They had believed the Americans couldn't touch them there. ST Idaho had proven them wrong. Senior Captain Nguyen Thanh Lim, the officer who had been so confident that morning, survived the arc-light strikes but barely. He was interviewed by American intelligence after being captured in 1972, and his account of November 28, 1968, was revealing. "We heard the helicopters but paid no attention. Helicopters flew over all the time. Then the alarm was raised. Intruders in the camp, American commandos. Just 6 men, but they were taking photographs, stealing documents. We sent 2 companies to capture them, 400 soldiers. We thought it would be easy. They fought like devils. Their weapons never stopped firing. They had grenades, mines, explosives. Every time we got close, something exploded. They moved like ghosts, always just ahead of us, always shooting back. Then the helicopters came, not transport helicopters, gunships. The fire was terrible. Hundreds of my men died in minutes. The Americans escaped. That night, the bombs came. B-52s flying too high to hear. The earth erupted, trees disappeared, bunkers collapsed. Men were buried alive or blown apart. It went on for hours, wave after wave. We had thought we were safe in Cambodia. We learned there was no safety. Not from the Americans, not from their ghosts. The transformation of North Vietnamese attitudes toward SOG teams mirrored their transformation toward other American capabilities. Initial confidence, based on superior numbers and territorial advantage, gave way to fear born from brutal experience. The ghosts were real, and they were deadly. SOG casualties for November 1968: 17 killed in action, 43 wounded in action, 2 missing and presumed dead. These losses came from approximately 250 men conducting over 150 missions across the fence, a casualty rate of 25% in a single month, the most dangerous job in the US military, bar none. But the intelligence value was immeasurable. SOG teams provided 80% of all intelligence on enemy operations in Laos and Cambodia. They located supply caches, identified troop movements, called in airstrikes on targets that conventional reconnaissance couldn't reach. They rescued downed pilots, snatched enemy officers for interrogation, and spread havoc throughout the North Vietnamese rear areas. The weapons and equipment that made ST Idaho's survival possible represented a unique combination of cutting-edge technology and brutal simplicity. The Khe-15, officially the XM177E2, was a shortened variant of the M16 rifle specifically developed for special operations. With an 11.5-inch barrel and a collapsible stock, it was almost a foot shorter than a standard M16, perfect for jungle fighting where engagement ranges rarely exceeded 50 meters. The Khe-15 fired the same 5.56mm ammunition as the M16, but the short barrel created massive muzzle flash and a distinctive sound that was louder than the standard rifle. SOG operators didn't care. The flash was hidden by jungle vegetation, and the sound was meant to scare the enemy. Each team member carried 10 30-round magazines, 300 rounds, enough for sustained firefights. The M79 grenade launcher, sawed off to reduce length, could lob 40mm high explosive rounds out to 400 meters with remarkable accuracy. In the hands of an expert, it was a precision weapon. Meyer and Bubba had practiced until they could put rounds through a window at 100 meters. Against massed troops, each 40mm grenade created a casualty radius of 15 meters. A single grenadier could hold off a platoon. The Claymore mine, M18A1, was perhaps the most effective defensive weapon ever created. 700 steel balls, each .10 caliber, embedded in C4 plastic explosive, arranged to spray forward in a 60-degree arc out to 50 meters. The Claymore could be command detonated with an electrical firing device, or, as ST Idaho used them, triggered with time delay fuses. A single Claymore could stop a company-sized assault. ST Idaho carried 8. But the true force multiplier was the Green Hornets. The 20th Special Operations Squadron, flying out of Nha Trang and Da Nang, specialized in supporting SOG operations. Their UH-1P helicopters were modified with additional fuel tanks, upgraded engines, and most importantly, overwhelming firepower. The M134 minigun, developed by General Electric, was an electrically powered Gatling gun firing 7.60 mm NATO ammunition at rates up to 6,000 rounds per minute. The barrels rotated continuously, preventing overheating, allowing sustained fire that would melt conventional machine guns. The sound was distinctive, a mechanical growl that enemy soldiers learned to fear. The sight was even worse, a solid stream of tracers that looked like a laser beam connecting the helicopter to the ground. Each Green Hornet carried tens of thousands of rounds of minigun ammunition. The crews would start firing at ranges beyond 1,000 meters and maintain fire until the team was extracted. The psychological effect was devastating. North Vietnamese soldiers, trained to fight through artillery and airstrikes, would break and run when the miniguns opened up. The sound meant death, and there was no defense against it. The 2.75-inch rockets, carried in 7 tube pods on each side of the helicopter, provided additional firepower. Each rocket carried a 10-pound high-explosive warhead. The pods could be ripple-fired, sending all 14 rockets downrange in seconds, or fired in pairs for sustained support. Against troops in the open, the rockets were devastating, Against bunkers and fortifications, they were adequate but not overwhelming. But for suppressing enemy fire during extraction, they were perfect. The Green Hornet pilots were as crazy as their SOG passengers. They would fly danger-close missions that violated every safety regulation, coming in low and slow to maximize their weapons' effectiveness, taking ground fire without flinching. Air Force Captain Alfonso Rivero, a door gunner with the Green Hornets, described the relationship in a 2020 interview. "Nothing gave us more satisfaction than getting our SF brothers out when they got in trouble, which was almost all the time. We knew if we didn't get them, they'd die out there. So we'd go in hot, take whatever fire was coming, and get them out. The NVA learned to hate that sound. When they heard our miniguns, they knew the ghosts were escaping." The Cambodia rules of engagement, imposed by the State Department to maintain the fiction of Cambodian neutrality, were ignored as often as followed. White phosphorus was technically banned, but ST Idaho carried WP, grenades on every mission. Fixed-wing air support was prohibited, but F-4 Phantoms would occasionally make navigational errors that brought them over enemy positions. Artillery was restricted, but the restrictions were waived in emergencies. The reality was that SOG teams operated in a legal grey zone. They officially didn't exist, conducted operations that officially didn't happen in countries where American forces officially weren't present. The paperwork said one thing. The reality was something else entirely. John Stryker Meyer continued running missions with ST Idaho until April 1969, completing a total of 67 cross-border operations. He survived countless firefights, 3 helicopter crashes, wounds from shrapnel and bullets, and the constant stress of knowing that every mission might be his last. He returned to the United States, finished his college degree, and spent decades as a journalist, never speaking about his SOG service, due to the secrecy agreement he had signed. In 1988, 2 decades after the war ended, the SOG secrecy agreement expired. Meyer began writing about his experiences, eventually publishing 3 books: Across the Fence, The Secret War in Vietnam, On the Ground, The Secret War in Vietnam, and SOG Chronicles. These books, along with those written by other SOG veterans, finally revealed the extent of the secret war. The statistics of SOG operations were staggering. From 1964 to 1972, MACV-SOG conducted approximately 450 missions annually, total of approximately 3,600 cross-border operations. Casualty rates varied by year but averaged 100%, meaning every man who served with SOG was either killed or wounded at least once during their tour. The confirmed enemy body count, always controversial and often exaggerated in Vietnam, was more reliable for SOG operations because teams were small and engagements were intense. SOG teams claimed approximately 11,500 enemy killed, with unknown thousands more wounded. The kill ratio, comparing SOG casualties to enemy losses, was estimated at 1 to 130, the highest of any American unit in any war. But beyond body counts was the strategic impact. SOG operations forced North Vietnam to divert approximately 60,000 troops to defend the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Every soldier guarding supply depots, every anti-aircraft gunner protecting truck convoys, every security force hunting SOG teams was a soldier not fighting in South Vietnam. The diversion of resources was enormous. The psychological impact was equally significant. North Vietnamese soldiers dreaded assignment to the trail. They knew that at any moment 6 ghosts might appear from the jungle, call in airstrikes, and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. The fear was so pervasive that NVA commanders instituted buddy systems, requiring soldiers to move, in groups of never fewer than 4. Single soldiers, even officers, were forbidden from walking alone. The ghosts hunted stragglers. The Thanksgiving Day mission became legendary within SOG. Other teams heard the story, embellished it, turned it into a cautionary tale about what happened when you got too cocky. But the core facts remained undisputed. 6 men had walked into 30,000 enemy soldiers and walked out alive. The odds said it was impossible. The reality was that for SOG teams, impossible was just another mission parameter. By 1970, as American forces began withdrawing from Vietnam and Vietnamization transferred responsibility to South Vietnamese forces, SOG operations began winding down. The teams that had operated with near impunity in the late 60s found themselves increasingly restricted. Cambodian operations were curtailed after the 1970 incursion. Laotian operations continued but with tighter rules. North Vietnamese operations were largely cancelled. In April 1972, Mac Phsog officially stood down. The secret war was over. The teams disbanded, the forward operating bases closed, the aircraft transferred to other units. The men who had served signed new secrecy agreements, reminding them that their service remained classified. They returned to civilian life, carrying secrets they couldn't share, memories they couldn't discuss, and trauma they couldn't explain. Many struggled with the transition. How do you explain to a potential employer that you spent 2 years conducting cross-border operations into neutral countries, killing enemy soldiers in combat that officially never happened? How do you tell your wife why you wake up screaming from nightmares about helicopters and jungles? How do you reconnect with a society that had turned against the war and viewed veterans with suspicion or contempt? Some succeeded. Meyer became a journalist, channeling his experiences into writing. Others struggled, fighting battles with PTSD, substance abuse, and survivor's guilt. Why had they survived when so many teammates had died? What was the point of it all when South Vietnam fell in 1975, negating everything they had fought for? The fall of Saigon was particularly devastating for ZOG veterans. They watched on television as North Vietnamese tanks rolled through streets they had fought to defend, as helicopters evacuated the last Americans from the embassy roof, as their indigenous teammates were left behind to face communist retribution. The Montagnards, Nungs, and Vietnamese who had fought alongside American commandos were hunted down and killed or sent to re-education camps. The promised American support never came. Nguyen Van Sao, Meyer's point man, the warrior who had sensed the NVA approaching on Thanksgiving Day and saved the team, survived the war. He was captured by North Vietnamese forces in 1974, tortured for information about American operations, and sent to a re-education camp. He was released in 1982, broken in body but not in spirit. Through the efforts of Meyer and other SOG veterans, Sao was granted refugee status and immigrated to the United States in 1987. Meyer met him at the airport in California. They hadn't seen each other in 18 years. Sao walked off the plane, spotted Meyer in the crowd, and the two men embraced, both crying. No words were necessary. The bond forged in the jungles of Cambodia and Laos had survived 2 decades of separation. Sao lived in California until his death in 2003. He never spoke about the war, never sought recognition, never asked for anything from the country he had fought beside. He worked as a janitor, raised a family, and quietly lived his life. At his funeral, Meyer and a dozen other SOG veterans attended, men who had fought with Sao, who owed him their lives, who would never forget what he had done. The Green Hornet pilots and crews maintained their own brotherhood. They held reunions, shared stories, and kept in touch with the SOG veterans they had supported. The relationship was reciprocal. The pilots knew that without SOG teams calling in targets, their mission was meaningless. The SOG teams knew that without Green Hornet fire support, they would have died in the jungle. Each depended on the other completely. In 2001, Mac Phsog was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest unit award in the US military, recognizing extraordinary heroism in action. The citation covered the period from January 1964 to April 1972 and was presented posthumously to the unit. The ceremony at Fort Bragg drew hundreds of SOG veterans, many meeting for the first time since the war. They shared stories, compared scars, and remembered fallen teammates. The citation's language was specific. The members of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, distinguished themselves by extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy in the Republic of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia from 24 January 1964 to 1 May 1972. The transformation of public awareness about SOG operations took decades. During the war, the unit's very existence was classified. After the war, veterans couldn't discuss their service. Only in the 1980s and 90s, as books and documentaries began appearing, did the American public learn about the secret war. The reaction was mixed. Some celebrated SOG as an example of American elite warfare capabilities. Others criticized the cross-border operations as violations of international law. The debate continues, but the facts remain undisputed. Mac Phsog was the most effective special operations unit in American history, achieving strategic results with minimal resources in the most dangerous combat environment imaginable. At the Special Operations Command headquarters at Fort Liberty, North Carolina, a memorial honors the men of Makfisog. Black marble panels list the names of over 400 men killed in action. Additional panels list those missing and presumed dead, men who disappeared in the jungle and were never recovered. The memorial is inscribed with the unit motto, "You have never lived until you have almost died. For those who fight for it, life has a special flavor the protected will never know." John Stryker Meyer, now in his late 70s, continues to speak about SOG operations, ensuring that the story isn't forgotten. He has appeared in documentaries, given interviews, and written extensively about his experiences. But he always emphasizes that he didn't do anything special. He was just a soldier doing his job, trying to survive, trying to bring his team home. "People ask me if I was scared," Meyer said in a 2020 interview. "Of course I was scared. Every mission, every insertion, every time the helicopter door opened and we jumped into the jungle, I was terrified. But you do the job anyway. You trust your teammates. You trust your training. You trust that the Green Hornets will come get you if things go bad. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you survive." The Thanksgiving Day mission, that impossible extraction of 6 men from the middle of 30,000 enemy soldiers, wasn't won by superior firepower or better tactics. It was won by trust. Trust in teammates who would die before leaving you behind. Trust in pilots who would fly into hell to get you out. Trust in indigenous soldiers who knew the jungle better than any American ever could. Trust that no matter how bad things got, someone was coming for you. Captain Nguyen Thanh Lim, the NVA officer who had been so confident that morning, was interviewed one final time before his death in 1998. He was asked about November 28, 1968, about the day his divisions were discovered in their supposedly safe Cambodian sanctuary. His answer was simple. "We thought we were safe. We thought the Americans wouldn't cross the border. We thought we outnumbered them by thousands to 1. We were wrong about everything. Those 6 men, those ghosts, they taught us that there was no safety, that numbers didn't matter, that borders were just lines on maps. They taught us to fear." The fear was justified. By the time Makfisog stood down in 1972, North Vietnamese forces in Laos and Cambodia lived in constant terror of the ghosts. They moved in groups, avoided predictable routes, posted excessive security and still died. The psychological victory was more significant than any body count. The North Vietnamese controlled the territory, but they never felt safe in it. The lasting legacy of ST Idaho's Thanksgiving Day mission isn't the statistics or the body count. It's the proof that, in special operations, the old rules don't apply. 6 men beat 30,000 because they were better trained, better equipped, better supported, and more determined. Because they refused to accept that the mission was impossible. Because when the situation went from bad to catastrophic to completely hopeless, they kept fighting. The mathematics said they should have died. 6 men don't survive contact with 30,000 enemy soldiers. 6 men don't extract from the middle of a division-sized base camp. 6 men don't win firefights against hundreds of pursuers. The mathematics were clear. But John Stryker Meyer and his team weren't mathematicians. They were SOG. And for them, impossible was just another Thursday. The Thanksgiving dinner that morning at Boo Dop, the turkey and gravy and cranberry sauce, had been interrupted by a mission briefing. The feast was still there when they returned, cold but edible. The team sat down and finished their meal, eating mechanically, too exhausted to taste anything. They had survived. Their teammates were alive. The mission was complete. It was, by any measure, a good Thanksgiving. And in the jungle 7 kilometers inside Cambodia, North Vietnamese soldiers were still running, fleeing from the memory of 6 ghosts who had appeared from nowhere, fought like demons, and disappeared into the sky on helicopters that rained fire. The ghosts of SOG had spoken, and the North Vietnamese would never forget the sound.